Everyone, we're just letting everyone log in, so we'll just give it a minute or two before we get going with the webinar. Perfect. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this One Spatial FME webinar. My name is Joanna, and I'll be monitoring the chat and helping if you have any technical issues throughout the presentation. Today, we'll be focusing on conditional parameters in FME, and your host will be Ian Fletcher, and I'll hand over to him in a minute. Before we start, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. You're all on mute, but if you do have any questions or comments, please type them into the question panel, and we'll get to these at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session. And if we don't get the chance to answer everything, don't worry, because we'll follow up with an email afterwards with a recording and some other useful information. So yeah, just to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded and we'll share the link with you later. So Ian, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanna. Welcome everyone. My name is Ian Fletcher. I am a certified FME professional and certified trainer here at One Spatial. And today we're going to be talking about the use and application of conditional visibility parameters in FME 2023. I wanted to start with a brief introduction to One Spatial. So we are a global company with offices in Europe and further afield, and we provide expertise in spatial data and software solutions to help our customers manage their data requirements. We have a number of technology partners whom we work very closely with, including Safe Software, and we've been a platinum partner with them for over 20 years. Within the FME division, we provide licensing, training and professional services to clients to help them manage their end-to-end suite of Safe Software products. I wanted to very briefly touch on some of the changes that have been made to the FME product family over the last year before we get into the meat of this webinar. Evidently, for the FME users out there, the most obvious change you will have noticed is in the visual branding and the names of the three main products, but it's very important to emphasize that under the hood, fundamentally, you are receiving the same product. Saying that, there are a few improvements to the two major releases that's worth being aware of. There's a range of new functionality and usability enhancements. So if you look at the compare and merge tool in 2023, you can now highlight changes in the navigator and synchronize the scroll bars between the left and right panels, and this will make it easier to navigate yourself around the comparison workspaces. You can also compare differences in runtime order between various transformers, again just making it easier to help you find subtle changes that might have occurred between different versions of the same workspace. 23.1 also introduced the first generative AI capabilities, and currently this allows you to use natural language processing to assist in the creation of regex, Python and SQL scripts. Remote engine deployment, this was first introduced in 23.0, but there have been some improvements in 23.1, which allows administrators to no longer have to manage multiple licenses. In 23.1, each remote engine can access a single centralized license, and this is stored against the primary engine, which again just makes managing deployments far easier. Projects are now easier to deliver and migrate between different environments. There is now clearer visibility on the various components of a workflow when you use the project export tools within FME Flow or Flow Hosted. When importing and exporting projects, you can now preview individual web and database connections, and also the deployment parameters, which are also introduced in 23.0. All dependencies are now clearly visible, allowing you to check everything is included at the point of import or export. And finally, as usual, we have a whole new range of formats and improvements to existing formats. And this year, there's been a particular focus on cloud native data workflows. So Stack is a hybrid JSON format, which is optimized to store 4D data. ZAR is an open source storage format for chunked and compressed n-dimensional arrays, and this is particularly useful for geoscience applications. Cloud optimized point clouds is a type of LAS file, which is optimized for use with gigabit-sized point clouds. And Parquet is a compressed and encoded file format, which is optimized for handling large and complex data sets. And finally, we come to conditional visibility parameters, again, new to 23.0, and this offers huge usability enhancements and is the subject of the rest of this webinar. Conditional visibility parameters allow for authors to decide which parameters are exposed at runtime and which may be hidden or disabled based on certain conditions and values that can be tested for dynamically within the user parameters window. To understand the power of conditional visibility, it's worth thinking about a common situation which might have occurred in a previous version of FME. So take this example of a simple enough using workspace which uses the raster resampler. You can see from the parameters window that the raster resampler has a resolution specification choice parameter, and this has 3 different options to choose from. And depending on which of these options you choose, you are presented with different required settings which are necessary for the operation of the chosen method. So we have the rows and columns specification. Here you need to specify a number of rows and a number of columns for your output raster. You have the cell spacing option. This chooses a metric distance for each cell to represent. And again, you need an X spacing and a Y spacing. And we have the percentage method, which will just scale the entire input raster by a certain fraction. And you can see, depending on which option you choose, different parameters are enabled or disabled when you within the transformer. As with any transformer, we can parameterize the raster resampler in order to allow the end user to choose which of the 3 sampling methods they want to select from. However, as soon as you create the row, column, or cell size parameter which controls the choice of method, FME no longer knows which of the 3 options will be selected at runtime, and so presents the end user with all 5 of the subparameters to populate regardless of the chosen method. And again, think about this from an end user point of view. This can be incredibly confusing and unhelpful. So there are 2 methods, again, this is pre-2023, there are 2 methods which you can potentially use to tackle this issue, both of which come with their own problems. So you could hard code in chosen values, as we see here on the left, so that the method but not the resolution can be changed from the user parameters. Or you could give the user complete flexibility to choose both the resampling method and the resolution by parameterizing the resolution settings also, as we see on the right. This, however, can produce a very confusing interface. FME does not know, again, at runtime, which method is going to be chosen, so you're going to be forced to populate all 5 subparameters regardless of which method is necessary. And bear in mind, for the rows and columns setting, for example, you might need the top 2 subparameters, but realistically the bottom 3 are not necessary, even though FME thinks they need to be populated. Needless to say, this is not ideal, and certainly if you're trying to create applications for other colleagues, or worse, for creating public-facing web applications, this can be incredibly confusing. Usability is impaired as the end user is not necessarily certain, just by looking at the parameters which they need to populate, which settings are actually required for the workspace to operate correctly. This brings us nicely to the new functionality I want to talk to today, and that is conditional visibility parameters. So FME authors now have the ability to define parameters in such a way that they are enabled, disabled, and hidden dynamically based on other values that you previously selected. This allows you to more closely mimic the behavior of individual transformers, such as the raster resampler, within the translation parameters interface, which makes for cleaner and more user-friendly applications. In this demonstration, which I will talk through in the next couple of slides, you can see that instead of being presented with all 5 of the resolution parameters within the translation parameters window, you see where we get a dynamic selection of parameters based on which version of which resolution method is chosen. So, pardon me. Yeah. So how do we create, sorry for that, how do we create conditional visibility of parameters for yourself? So here you can see the parameters manager window, and you can see all the parameters that we've created for the raster resampler. If you create the parameters directly within the transformer itself, they will already be correctly set up with the necessary data types pre-populated. And you'll notice that we now have this additional section at the bottom of the settings window, which you can optionally enable, which is that of conditional visibility. Enable this button on a parameter that you wish to control the appearance of, and you will be presented with the following additional options in the form of an if, then, else statement. This will then function like a conditional statement in the attribute manager. So hopefully for those of you who use FME on a daily basis, you should be fairly familiar with how this looks and feels. So set up the if condition first. This defines which parameter is controlling the behavior of the subsequent parameters. So in this case, the resolution specification parameter called row, column, or cell size will control the behavior of the columns parameter. Once the controlling parameter is defined, set the then statement, and this will control what the parameter should do when the if statement passes. So in this case, the number of cells parameter will be enabled so long as the row, column, or cell size parameter is set to rows or columns. Finally, the else statement can be then set. So this determines what happens if an alternative value is selected. And in this case, the parameter will be hidden unless rows or columns is selected. The else then settings have the same 3 options: enabled, disabled, or hide. And this affects the behavior of the parameter within the dialog box. On the left, we see that the rows, we see how this looks in reality. So on the left, we can see what the parameters look like when they are disabled but visible, such as the number of rows and columns when cell spacing is selected. On the right, you can see those settings have been hidden entirely. Again, it's all about the user preference, what kind of dialog box you're trying to create. A few other things to point out. User parameters themselves are not the only things that can be controlled in this way. So entire group boxes or message parameters, both of which are key tools for making user-friendly interfaces. These can also be hidden or disabled based on the values of other parameters. Another thing to point out, most parameter types can be made conditionally visible. However, this is a new functionality. The flexibility that you might otherwise expect can be a little bit limited. So here we see how a message parameter can be controlled by a selected date, and you can see the options are fairly limited. But this is something that I suspect will be customized more in future iterations of SAFe, just to give you more flexibility in how you can use the parameters to set up conditional clauses that are customized by the data type. One parameter that is not integrated into this behavior is that of encrypted password parameters. Because the password parameter is encoded, it cannot be read directly into a conditional statement. Any password parameters which have been set up will be missing from the selectable parameters list when creating your if statements. Again, this is an improvement that we think would be logical for SAFe to introduce in a future release. Be aware when creating these parameters that the order in which the parameters are set matters when creating conditional visibility. So parameters can be controlled by those which are set above them in the list, but not by those which are set below. Here we can see that the resolution specification can control the 3 messages and the 5 resolution settings below it in the list, but not the input JPEG to process. If we move the resolution specification down, you can see that it can control the number of rows, and it can now no longer control the rows and columns and the 3 message parameters which are being set above it. They are being set before the resolution specification and thus cannot be conditionally controlled by it. So we know now how to set up some basic conditional visibility within a workspace. What else can we do with this functionality? Well, conditional visibility can also be incorporated into custom transformers. So here we see a typical use case of a custom transformer. A key piece of the workflow here is the use of the raster sampler example again, and it's being replicated in 2 places. So this is a perfect place to use a custom transformer to tidy up the workspace. When creating a custom transformer that you may wish to use conditional visibility with, be mindful of whether or not you want to control the parameters from the translation dialog box or within the custom transformer itself. If you wish to set the conditional parameters at runtime, make sure the disable attribute assignment is itself disabled, and this will allow you to transfer the parameters from the custom transformer to the translation parameter window and set them once at runtime as opposed to individually within each transformer. If you do not wish the user to have control, disable this option, and this will preserve the conditional visibility within the workspace, but it will not allow the end user to control the settings. And finally, conditional parameters are a fantastic way of creating dynamic forms within web applications within FME Flow or Flow hosted. So again, set up your workspace in FME Form as usual. Here we are creating a simple workspace that allows users to fill in a post-webinar questionnaire, store the answers in a Postgres database, and then optionally email the recipient with information on upcoming events. Conditional visibility parameters can then be designed in the same way as we've just discussed. Once you are happy with your workspace, save and publish to FME Flow or Flow hosted, and then you can use the internal app creation tools to create a form in the usual way. Bear in mind that the translation parameters window will basically becomes the front end of your form, and so we can use conditional visibility settings here alongside the existing customizable options to really enrich the user experience of the front end web application. Hopefully my colleague should be posting the link to this questionnaire in the chat, so you can have a go with this yourself. So again, this is just a demonstration to show you what conditional visibility looks like. Currently, the emailing functionality has been disabled on this app, but yeah, again, just give you an idea of what is possible for you to do. One last thing I wanted to point out. The functionality is brand new to FME, and subsequently SAFE welcomes feedback and improvements from the community. If you have an idea on how this functionality can be improved, you can always visit the ideas site on the FME Community Hub in order to post a suggestion and see what other suggestions members of the community have come up with. These can then be voted up or down, and the most popular choices will be considered by SAFE for future integrations into new releases. I'm going to also be sending the links to some of these ideas that I've created and come across when building this presentation in the follow-up email. Finally, we will also be sending you out a bunch of additional links and resources that I found helpful when constructing this presentation. You can see the QR code in the top right-hand corner, which will take you to the web application, and we'll also be sending out the URL to that in the follow-up email. With that, I thank you very much for joining this webinar, and I'll now open it up to any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ian. That was great, really insightful. We have had a question. So, excuse me, obviously I'm not an FME expert, but the question is, do these conditional visibility parameters work in FME mobile apps?
Yes, they do. Again, bear in mind that conditional visibility functionality is new, so it is a little bit restricted, and the mobile app itself is effectively a slightly pared down version of FME Flow hosted. But yes, I would expect that if you build a form or an application within FME Flow hosted or Flow, and then brought that into the FME mobile app, I would expect those parameters to behave in a similar way. Any other questions, Joanna?
No, that is it. That was the only question.
Fantastic.
But yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
As we said, yeah, obviously we'll send around a recording, and we'll send all of the links that you can see here. We'll send them around in the email as well with the useful resources. So unless there's anything else, Ian, I guess we can wrap up.
Lovely. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for everyone for attending. We will send you around those resources in the next day or so.
Perfect. Okay, thanks again, Ian, and thanks everyone for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye.